So the American people are getting fed up with the high price of drugs, and nowhere is this more so than with the price of cancer drugs. In the last few years, things have just gone crazy. I mean, it used to be that if you had to have chemotherapy, you'd have one of these common patented drugs, but it wouldn't cost that much. You know, it was a few hundred or a few $1,000s. But in the last couple of years, there have been no drugs approved that have been under $100,000 per patient. There's a drug called Keytruda that you probably heard of. It's manufactured by Merck, and this drug, they charge $150,000 a year for the patients. And so even if you have fairly decent insurance, you're probably going to still wind up paying about $30,000 out of pocket for that. Last year the FDA approved a drug called Kymriah, and it's a kind of immune therapy, and the price on that is $475,000 per infusion. I mean, it's crazy. The 20% copay on that is almost $100,000. So these are drugs that are used to treat childhood leukemia or adults with lymphoma, and I won't even get into the question of how effective or whether they're effective or not. The point is, people want them, they need them, they're approved drugs, and you're supposed to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to get it. Now, what's the actual situation for American workers? The average American worker who's working a 40-hour week is making somewhere around $45,000 to $50,000 a year. So you're supposed to somehow come up with $100,000 or $150,000 or $450,000 to pay for these life-saving drugs, and you can't do that. 4 out of 10 people in America could not meet a $400 financial emergency. So like if the transmission goes out on your car, or you need a new furnace or something, you're either going to have to put that off, or you're going to have to borrow from relatives or put it on a credit card and try to pay that off, and that's 40% of the public, and these are the good times. So in bad times it goes over 50%. Can't meet a $400 emergency. So how are you going to meet a $150,000 emergency? We know a lot of people are just having to do without these drugs, and this is generating enormous bitterness in the population. Meanwhile, the drug companies are getting richer and richer. I think the compensation for the president or CEO of Merck last year was something like $27 million for one person, for one person's job, $27 million. And that money is coming out of the money that these super profits that are being earned through the sale of these cancer drugs, these outrageously priced cancer drugs. So what's the solution? One obvious thing that would make things better would be if Medicare would be able to negotiate the price of the drugs that FDA approves. You may not realize this, but by law, it was written into the law that Medicare can't negotiate on prices. So you remember a while back there was a move to allow Americans to import medicines from Canada. Well, why would medicines be cheaper in Canada? The only reason is these are medicines made in the USA, and then they're exported to Canada. But the Canadian government, unlike the American government, negotiates for the price. They're buying a lot of these drugs so they can get them at a cheaper price. So it's actually economical for Americans to go across the border to Canada or to Mexico and get their drugs there and bring them back to the United States. I mean, that wouldn't be a complete solution, but if Medicare could negotiate, that would be very good, and we would save a ton of money as consumers. In a recent poll, it was found that over 80% of the public agreed that something drastic has to be done to lower the price of drugs. It's just gotten to be a crazy ripoff of the population. Another instance of the 1% of the population who own these corporations soaking the rest of the 99% of the people in the country. And it's got to stop. And I'm just hopeful that, you know, in the coming situation, if we could ever get the government up and running again, that this would be something that a lot of people would agree upon. The only reason that a politician wouldn't agree to this, as far as I'm concerned, is because a lot of politicians are bought and paid for by Big Pharma, by the pharmaceutical industry. They're taking their direction from these people, whether they're personally taking so-called campaign contributions, which is another name for bribes, or whether they're, you know, just so aligned with the donors to their party that they can't conceive of doing something to lower the prices for the people. But I think that come the next election, a lot of these politicians are going to be very surprised, because people are going to rise up against this. And the cutting edge of this is these outrageous costs of cancer drugs. It just can't go on. Well, till next time, for Moss Reports, this is Ralph Moss.